Tonight, I am going to teach you how to tell the difference between a 1982 large date and a small date. And by the time we're done, you will never confuse one for the other ever again. It has not been since the 1955 double die or 1969 S double die that anybody has seen this kind of fever for the hunt for a specific coin in the coin world as there has been with the 1982 Denver minted copper small date. Now, the problem is that there are a few of them that have been found, but you have to take into account that billions of 1982 Lincoln cents have actually been produced or were produced. There are 7 different varieties of 1982 copper and zinc, small date and large date, between the two mints. Technically speaking, there are actually 8 varieties now that a small date Denver copper has actually been found. But how do you tell the difference between a large date and a small date? And how do you know whether you've actually found that amazing coin or not? Well, this video is going to teach you how to tell the difference simply by looking at the coin with your bare eyes. On the screen in front of you are a large date and a small date 1982 Lincoln cent. And while they look very, very similar when you look at them like this, actually, they're not as close or identical as one might think. You just have to look a little closer in order to see what the differences are. So, if you're like me, you tend to learn a little bit better based off of visual aids rather than trying to read about it in a book. That's probably why you're watching this video, to learn from a visual aid. So, what we're going to do is use some of those visual aids to actually teach you how to identify these large date and small date simply by looking at a couple of very important things. The very, very first important thing that you need to be able to do is to put an image up onto your computer or even onto your phone to be able to manipulate it by drawing lines on it. So that means that if you can blow up the 1982 picture or 1982 date in picture form on your phone and use your editing software to actually take a ruler and draw straight lines, I can guarantee you that this first picture you're going to see will pretty much be able to tell you whether or not you have a large date or a small date without even going much further into this video. And there it is. This one simple first picture, really, for the most part, will be able to tell you without a shadow of a doubt whether you have a large date or a small date simply by looking at the number 1 of the date. Now, if you look close at this picture, you will notice that the number 1 of the date is actually very, very small compared to the rest of the numbers. It does not match up size wise to the bottom of the 8 or the 2 as you draw a line across the bottom of the entire date. Here is the second way to be able to tell the difference between the two. In the 1982 large date, the number 8 actually holds a very large clue. No pun intended. But believe it or not, if you look at the two circles that make up the number 8 are actually almost identical in size. Now, I'm going to quickly throw up a picture of the 1982 small date that I'll cover a little later on in this video to show you the difference. There you go. Now you can actually see that the 1982 small date has different sized circles on the top than it does on the bottom. And as a result, it looks more like trying to build a snowman. All right, so let's go back to the very first thought that we had here on the large date, which is the fact that the one is significantly smaller than the rest of the numbers in the date. Now, I've drawn a line at the very bottom of the one going straight across to the other numbers, the 8 and the 2, and you can see just how much shorter that number one actually is when you compare it to the 8 and the 2 by drawing that line. This next picture is important, but unfortunately, there's a lot of people that don't want to go to quite this extent to be able to figure out if they have a large date or a small date. So I'll simply explain this by saying that later on in the video, I will put this picture up with the small date version right on top of it so that you can see the difference between the two. What you should be paying attention to in this picture is the fact that if I draw a line from the very bottom tip of the nine straight across, that the other two lines intersect at directly the midpoint between the 8 and the 2 below the date. So, in this very last picture, this is the proverbial nail in the coffin, so to speak, when it comes to determining whether or not you have a large date or a small date. On the large date version, because of the size of the numbers across the date, there is absolutely 100% no way, shape, or form that you can take and add another number two between the last two of the date and the rim. As you can see in this picture, I have actually superimposed another number two right next to the two in the date, and it does not fit. So, with that being said, this is another very easy way to determine whether you have a large date or a small date. Now, I'm going to cover the small date relatively quickly because all of the things that I just pointed out for the large date are going to be much different for the small date. So, as you can see on this particular picture in front of you, you will notice that the number one of the date is the same exact height all the way across to the 8 and the 2. The two lines that I have drawn on the top and the bottom match up perfectly all the way across. This is one of your easiest and quickest ways to determine a large date from a small date. I promised this picture earlier in the video, and here it is. This is the large date up on top with the small date underneath it. And as you can see, I have lined up the straight vertical lines next to the number 8 in both of these pictures. Now, if you look very, very closely, you will notice that the size of the circles differs greatly between the large date and the small date of this particular date. So, in this particular picture, Blaine has gone full geometry class on you. Yes, there are all sorts of different angles in this picture, but the one that's important is the vertical line that is between the 8 and the 2. You will notice that that line does not intersect where the other two lines did in the other picture. I'll throw that one up here real quick so that you can see how those two lines meet up and match with that vertical line between the 8 and the 2. And we'll go back to the other one where you can see that they do not. Now, the reason for this particular drawing and picture really doesn't have much to do with all of these angles, so much as it has to do with the curve to the number 2. That curve is exceptionally important because on a large date, it has more of a slide to it, a straight line that comes down to the bottom of the 2 versus a shoulder, so to speak, of the small date number 2. Now, also interesting to note, and one of the best ways that I use to determine a large date or a small date is that bend to the two has the same bend to it that the shoulder does on the Lincoln profile on the coin. And last but not least, the proverbial nail in the coffin for the small date, just like the large date did have one, the two next to the date. Between the date and the rim, as you can see in this picture, you can actually duplicate the number two of the date, slide it over, and fit it between the two and the rim of the coin. This is without a doubt also one of the easiest ways to determine whether you have a large date or a small date simply by looking at the coin with your naked eye. I appreciate everyone watching. Thank you very much for making it to the end. Hopefully, you have learned something. If you have, please do me a favor, hit that like button. I do greatly appreciate it, and the YouTube algorithms definitely like it. Also, remember to subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. I would appreciate that as well. And keep those notification bells on so that you get notified when more coin learning videos from Island Time Coins come along. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you for watching.